The power of discard effects in Magic the Gathering have been appreciated, feared, and exploited since Magic the Gathering's earliest days. And there have been a lot of good discard spells printed since the game's debut in August of 1993. So, which are the best? Magic Untapped takes a look in the Spindown. Starting our list off as the number 10 discard spell. That's spell as an instant or sorcery, not creature or artifact or anything. We have
10.
Ravenscre. A simple 1-for-1, this one-drop discard spell does exactly that. It forces a player to discard any one card from their hand of their choosing. While fairly pedestrian at first, where the card gets its muster is in its retraceability, allowing players to do it all over again at some point in the future. It turns the game into a great outlet for unnecessary later game land draws. What's more, unlike Flashback, Retrace keeps the spell in your graveyard for future uses. Not so pedestrian after all, is it? Ravenscre is most often found in Modern with decks such as 8-Rack and Loam. It also sees occasional play in Legacy lands and certain Dark Depths builds.
9.
Funeral Charm. A part of the second cycle of charm spells, Funeral Charm made its debut in Visions. It's a versatile, multi-mode spell that can be a one-drop discard spell, a creature buff, weenie spot removal, or great creature evasion by means of Swamp Walk. What's even better is it gives all of this flexibility for the low price of 1 black mana. A mana cost that will appear quite a few times on this list. The card sees play in modern decks such as 8-Rack, Black Ponza, and Smallpox.
8.
Unmask. Who doesn't like free? Costing a black and 3, Unmask is one of those infamous pitch spells that allows players to play it essentially for free. In this case, exiling a black spell from your hand. While that does throw off the card advantage ratio a bit, it does allow you to play it turn 1. And what do you get for those efforts? The card gives you intel by letting you see your opponent's hand, and also lets you force them to discard any one non-land card without restrictions or penalty. Not too shabby. Unmask sees play in Legacy and Vintage, mostly in Dredge and Reanimator decks.
7.
Cabal Therapy. This old school card from Judgment can be a real pain for opponents. While seemingly less than great on the surface because you have to name a specific card, and your opponent only discards if the named card is in their hand, it's actually quite powerful. Assuming the first card is a whiff, you still get the intel necessary to hit on Flashback. And if Flashback is enabled by using a recursion creature, you can plan on getting that creature back in short order, essentially casting via Flashback for free. Currently played in Legacy, the card is often included in Dredge, Ad Nauseam, and certain Delver builds.
6.
Kolaghan's Command. A modal spell, Kolaghan's Command lets players tack on a discard effect onto any of the card's other 3 modes, a Raise Dead effect, a Shatter effect, or a Shock effect. Regardless what's chosen, it can be a devastating blow for your opponent. It's easily the best of the command cycle from Dragons of Tarkir. Often found in top-tier decks, this highly flexible card can be found in both aggro and control decks, including Mardu and Rakdos aggro and Grixis control. It is also a popular inclusion in certain Death Shadow builds.
5.
Inquisition of Kozilek. Turn 1 discard is powerful, and Inquisition of Kozilek is one of the most powerful one-drop discard spells yet printed. Not only does it provide early game and small drop disruption, it also gives the caster invaluable information about their opponent's hand, and, often, good enough intel to tell what kind of deck they're playing. Plus, if you whiff with your Inquisition, it's probably because your opponent does not have anything to do in the early game anyhow. In other words, they're probably not much of a threat, at least for a couple of turns. An important card in Modern, the card does often see play in Mono Black Devotion, Jund, Abzan, and Death Shadow. The card also shows up in Legacy from time to time.
4.
Duress. Continuing with the turn 1 one-drop discard spells, Duress has been a staple discard spell in Magic since its original printing in Urza's Saga. The card efficiently disrupts your opponent while granting you information. And while it can't hit lands or creatures, it can hit everything else. This includes Planeswalkers, a card type that didn't even exist yet when Duress first saw print. Furthermore, there is not a CMC limit on which cards can and cannot be discarded, like with Inquisition of Kozilek. Thanks to Wizards of the Coast reprinting over and over again, the card often sees wide play in Standard, but also has a home in Modern, Legacy, and even Vintage. No doubt it'll find similar popularity in the new Pioneer format.
3,
Mind Twist. Magic's original discard spell, Mind Twist was incredibly feared and pretty much universally considered to be the definition of overpowered. Costing just black and X, you can make your opponent discard X cards from their hand at random. Heck, that might simply wind up being quite literally their entire hand. Talk about an immediate game changer. Keep in mind that this was printed in the same set as Dark Ritual, so firing this off for 2 or more on turn 1 or turn 2 was not exactly a rare occurrence. Because of its power, however, it was quickly restricted and banned in multiple formats back when it was in print. Even today it's only playable in Vintage, and even then it was restricted to 1 copy per deck. Despite phenomenal cosmic powers, however, it wasn't quite good enough to crack our top 2. Hymn to Torok. 2 mana to make an opponent discard 2 cards is already good card advantage, but throw in the fact that your opponent has no control whatsoever over which cards those are thanks to the fact that those cards are chosen randomly, and you can cause some serious harm to your opponent's chances at victory. While it does not give you any additional intel, it's a brutal thing to do to your opponent on turn 2, even more so on turn 1 with the help of Dark Ritual, Moxen, or other sort of black mana acceleration. It was one of the most popular and powerful spells in early Magic, and it's still one of the game's best discard spells to see print, seeing play in a number of legacy decks including Pox, Grixis Control, Jund, and others. And now some honorable mentions. Vicious Rumors from Guilds of Ravenscre is a nice 3-for-1 spell that sees plays in 8-rack decks. A good turn 1 play, it not only forces each opponent to discard a card of their choice from their hand, but they also mill 1 and lose a life, before giving you a 1-point life gain. Delirium Schemes from Dissension hits all players, you included, for a 3-card discard. The card also sees play in 8-rack strategies. Smallpox from Time Spiral does a lot for just 2 mana. Not only does it make each player discard a card, but they also lose a point of life and have to sacrifice both a land and a creature. As powerful an effect as that all is, it's just too unfocused to include on this list. Thoughtseize. Getting back to our list and back to turn 1 1-drop discard spells, Thoughtseize reigns supreme. While granted, in addition to paying 1 black mana, you will also wind up losing 2 life, the card does allow you to not only look at target player's hand, it also forces them to discard any single non-land card of your choice. No restrictions on CMC or color or any of that. If it's not a land, it's fair game. Plus, if for some reason it gets countered by, say, a force of will or something, the 2 life you'd lose never happens because it's not actually part of the cost of the spell. Rather, it's just part of the spell's effect. That's something for you to keep in mind during a future judge call. The card sees play in nearly every competitive deck that runs black. That includes Fairies, Jund, Delver, Death Shadow, Mono Black Devotion, Pox, Living End, Dredge, really the list just goes on and on. Plain and simple, Thoughtseize is the single best discard spell ever printed in Magic the Gathering. Seeing as Mark Rosewater once said that its reprinting in Theros was a bad idea, it might be the last time we ever see it in a standard legal set. So that's it, the top 10 discard spells in Magic the Gathering. If you like what we do here on Magic Untapped, please support us on Patreon and subscribe here on YouTube for more great Magic the Gathering content.